Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. What I wanted to do today was take you back to the 20th century and have a look at what I believe was one of the most capable battlefield commanders that may have had a real direct impact on human history, especially if you look at ultimately where Western Europe ended. Now, what I would like to do is normally when we look at battlefield commanders of the 20th century, we go back to World War II, we go back maybe to World War I, and we look at generals such as Eisenhower, Patton, Rommel, Rundstedt, Heinz, Guderian. Those generals often come to mind. But in this episode, I'm going to talk about not a general. He eventually became a general. But early in his career, he was a lieutenant colonel. When he made the most impact, he was a lieutenant colonel and then eventually promoted to colonel. He was a battlefield commander. He commanded multiple battalions. And what we first need to do is go back to the area of the conflict in which this individual operated in. And we want to go back to 1930s Spain. Now, what's interesting, if you were to study the Spanish Civil War, if you look at any civil war that has taken place through history, I would say that the lead up to the Spanish Civil War mirrors right now what is happening in parts of Western Europe and the United States, and that is the left-right divide. Now, if you go back to 1931 to about 1936, the activities and the ideology that was being pushed by left-wing Spain was much more harsh than you would see right now in the United States or Western Europe. Now, I'll tell you that oftentimes this individual, Franco, General Franco, the Caudillo, he really gets a bad rap. Now, this isn't the individual that I am referencing, but I think Franco needs to be touched upon. Franco, history has not portrayed him well. Now, first, you have to understand, Franco did not join the Axis powers. Spain was not engaged in military conflict against the Allies. Didn't happen. Now, he is often portrayed as a fascist. Now, going into 1936, again, where Franco and other Spanish generals declared themselves for the rising, there was a cause and there was an effect that made that happen. General Franco, leading up to the Spanish Civil War, did not want to rebel. There were things that were happening well before 1936, 1935 that were occurring that one would think that the military would rise up, especially a right-leaning military. But they didn't. Didn't happen. It only happened in 1936. And once Nathania took power in Spain, and you started to see the left-wing ideology really start to manifest itself. And especially if you look at the Spanish Constitution of 31 that was really starting to be implemented in 36 in regards to the seizure of personal property rights. The seizure of personal property. Initially, it was directed against the Catholic Church. Expropriation was placed into the Spanish Constitution by the left to seize personal property, and initially that was for personal property of the Spanish Catholic Church. But it spread. It spread to then business owners and even middle-class individuals inside of Spain. You started to see some activities that were very much like the Bolshevik Revolution in what became the Soviet Union. And that's when Franco changed and decided he had to take action. Look, what would have happened in Spain would have gone two ways. A right-wing military dictatorship or a dictatorship of the proletariat. A communist, Marxist dictatorship would have taken place in Spain had Franco not risen. Now, how would that have changed history? Well, going into the start of World War II, if the left would have been successful in Spain, you would have seen a Stalinist dictatorship being present in Spain in 1939. More likely than not, that red dictatorship would have probably spread to France. Communist organizations were very prevalent in France. And ultimately, the Spanish Civil War curtailed a lot of those left-wing organizations in other countries. Your national brigades. Many of the combat supporters of left-wing, quote-unquote, Republican Spain were international fighters. Persons not indigenous to Spain, coming from all parts of the globe, coming from the United States, coming from Russia, the Soviet Union, coming from France, Germany, Italy. It was all encompassing. Now, they came because of the Franco and the military rising. But the military rose for a reason. And Franco could see what was happening in his country. And he feared this left-wing dictatorship, which was most certainly going to occur. History has portrayed Republican Spain as this quote-unquote democratic institution that was fighting against fascism. That is simply not true. In all probability, it would have become a left-wing dictatorship if the Republicans had won Republican Spain. Now, disassociate U.S. Republicans to Spanish Republicans, totally different. If that would have happened, again, most likely Spain would have gone full-on communist. A communist dictatorship. Would have happened. And again, Franco, very, very hesitant. But Franco isn't the military commander that I want to talk about. So Franco and this individual went through the military academy together. And at the time of the onset of the Spanish Civil War, this individual that I'm about to disclose essentially commanded a regimental-sized formation of the Spanish Foreign Legion. At the time, the troops that existed in what is now Spanish Morocco, or was Spanish Morocco, were the most elite and best trained troops in 1936 Spain. And this lieutenant colonel commanded a regiment of the Spanish Foreign Legion, which wasn't really made up of foreigners. It was made up predominantly of Spaniards. Now, yes, there were Moroccans. There were large elements of Moroccan formations indigenous to Morocco that were in the Spanish army. But the Spanish Foreign Legion was made up of regular Spaniards. The majority were. Now, the individual that I'm talking about that rose up with Franco, and he had a very specific and crucial mission at the onset of the Rising. So first, let's disclose who this individual is. Yague. Hands down, the best battlefield commander during the Spanish Civil War. Hands down. He would have been compared to General Sherman during the U.S. Civil War. Very, very similar methodology in terms of battlefield tactics and desire to crush and defeat the enemy. Yague. So again, Lieutenant Colonel at the start of the conflict, commanded a couple battalions of the Spanish Foreign Legion, about 3,000 troops. 3,000 troops. Not a corps commander, not an army commander, essentially a reinforced regiment of very capable troops. And what happened was that they started the conflict, the onset of the Spanish Civil War in Morocco. They took those forces, Yague took those forces and moved them to southern Spain. And his initial objective at the onset of the Spanish Civil War was to march essentially from southern Spain up through Seville and seize control of the Portuguese-Spanish border, which culminated in the Battle of Badajoz, this location here. Now, at the time Yague entered the outskirts of Badajoz, he commanded a force of about 3,000 Spanish Foreign Legion personnel and some additional forces from Morocco as well. But the military-sized formation that positioned itself to seize Badajoz was about 3,000 personnel. The opposing force dug in and around Badajoz was about 6,000 personnel. They outnumbered Lieutenant Colonel Yague 2-1. And remember, Yague was attacking a defensive position, defended by 6,000 personnel with his attacking force of about 3,000 personnel. So normally, if you're attacking a city, you want to have about 3 times the force as your opponent. Wasn't the case in this battle. But he attacked and he defeated a force twice his size. And he treated those forces that were captured and or surrendered very harshly indeed. And that is one reason history does not look back kindly upon him. But Yague understood war. He understood he was in a war, and he understood that if he was defeated and his side did not win this war, in all likelihood, he and his family would have been killed. And that is why he acted the way he acted. He understood war. Now keep in mind, look, during the course of this conflict, elements of the left-wing, quote-unquote, Republican government went out and systematically executed and killed 4,000 Catholic priests. It happened. It's a fact. Not only did they do that, they killed tens of thousands of individuals that they considered part of the quote-unquote bourgeoisie. Middle-class people, upper-class people. Essentially anybody that did not support a far-left communist government, they went after. And then ultimately, General Yague was involved in the march towards Madrid, and then eventually the military forces of Spain took control of Madrid, and ultimately were successful in defeating the communist left-wing forces of the 1930s Spain during the Spanish Civil War. Now, would that have occurred without Lieutenant Colonel Yague leading his military formations to victory? Maybe, maybe not. But Yague, Lieutenant Colonel Yague, was instrumental in the nationalist victory over left-wing communist Spain. And an excellent battlefield commander, an incredibly aggressive, competent battlefield commander. I do believe that the German Condor Legion, which operated in Spain at the time, believed as well he was the most competent commander and would accept his operational commands. Most individuals in the leadership within the Condor Legion felt that most of the other generals in the nationalist Spain were not very competent. Yague was different. If you get a chance, I myself would like to read his book. He actually wrote a book, I do believe. Unfortunately, it's in Spanish, and I haven't been able to get a copy as of yet. But again, history has not looked well upon him. Most people don't even know who he is. And then again, history has not given Franco the benefit of the doubt. It's really a one-sided version of history that he was a fascist and he was no good and that's the way it is. That is not the case. There was a reason why Franco rebelled in rows. There was a reason, and it was a good reason. Anyway, that does it for today. As always, we'll end there with a picture of Colonel, later General of the Commander-in-Chief of the Spanish Air Force, General Yague. Good day.